We have a big Austin audience. We've maxed out our COVID audience. It would be every seat if it wasn't for COVID. But you just rocked the house. No surprise.
I wish I was there, man.
I know.
And I'm so happy that you're doing this. It's so incredibly sweet of you. And I love the Austin Film Society, and I love Austin. And anyway,
if you were here, Todd, I just wish you were here so I could give you the biggest hug I've ever given you. I love this movie so much, and it feels so special. And I was telling the audience before, the last time I saw you in person was at Sundance when I was there with Karen Carpenter. Yeah, that thing we did.
No, you've been such a.
But you mentioned this. You were just getting going, and you talked about experimental film. I could see your Todd Haynes mind just kind of working. Like I'm thinking experimental film is the visual corollary. And I was just I took that, and I've looked forward to this film ever since, and I'm just so giddy finally seeing what you've been doing.
Oh, wow.
And a great
thank you. That means so much to me.
A great pandemic project too, right? To edit this.
I'll say, what a place to be stuck in this world, in this culture, with that footage, with that incredible collection of experimental movies, and with my two editors that I just loved, who I loved working with so much. Adam Kernitz I'd never worked with before. Fonso Gonçalves I've worked with over the years. And Adam and Fonzie had worked together on Jim Jarmusch's Stooges film.
Right.
And that was Fonzie's first time working with Adam, and Fonzie wanted me to meet Adam for this film. And I love this guy. And then Adam was in Brooklyn, and Fonzie and I were in Los Angeles. And COVID hit, and Fonzie and I were basically quarantined together, and we all three were cutting. Like I haven't been cutting as much on a film in a long time as this one, and it was just pure.
A lot of cuts required.
You can imagine, right?
A lot of cuts required.
A lot of things to exclude.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's so overwhelming what you've created here. It's this. And I want to talk to you about it in terms of documentary. This is famously your first documentary. I mean, I feel like you've made documents, but this is an overt documentary. And how did that feel? Because, I mean, starting out, I've tried to make a few documentaries. I'm finishing one now. It's really hellish.
Oh, you are? Wow.
Yeah, it's not the way the brain works. But you're stuck with it's like found footage, and what you do with it, you can only push it so far because you just don't know what you're getting necessarily. You're kind of a slave to what exists and what doesn't exist. So what were some surprises for you? I mean, you had the great idea about using, in addition to whatever archive, to really have all that wonderful imagery that came from that art scene at that moment, which is, to me, thrilling. But I don't know what my question here is. What were you?
That's what made it. Yeah. That's what made it so. I mean, that's why I was like, immediately when they said, Todd, they came to me and said, would you be interested in doing a Velvet Underground documentary? And I immediately knew, as you know, that this is a band that doesn't exist anywhere in traditional footage, promotional footage, or concert footage, or any of the things that we associate with rock documentaries. This is a band that exists almost exclusively in the films of Andy Warhol, and I knew that their relationship. I knew that John Cale was close to Jack Smith, and that it went beyond just Warhol. That their relationships to experimental filmmakers was really complex and unique. So I was like, this is going to be the challenge, but the absolute creative invitation, I guess, to dive into these images and try to make a movie that was driven by the images and the music more than the talking heads and the oral histories. Although we had fucking amazing people who told the story, starting with John Cale. So it was like. Yeah, it was an embarrassment of riches, but exactly as you say, this is it's very different for dramatic filmmakers to turn their, it's all about, it's a writing process that is the editing process, and then you keep going back into the well and trying to find the language to refine what the story is, but it's very circular.
What I find most fascinating is what this film, or what's satisfying, let's say, and so appropriate for your subject matter, is what the film isn't.
Yeah.
Did you have some guidelines? I mean, you must have had some, okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to, it feels that way. Like you're like, oh no, I don't like that. That's not appropriate. In the intro to the audience, I said, it's so appropriate, this film, because you're never sold the Velvet Underground. You find the Velvet Underground when you're ready for them. I described that as a young person, being ready for them, being a little afraid of them, seeing Lou Reed with a needle in his arm and going, I'm going to wait on, and then when you find them, man.
That is so exactly how I felt. That is so perfectly stated. And I think when you're young and you're, starting to be exposed to things that are going to have a huge influence on your life, whether or not you end up being a creative person or not, I feel like there's this strange peripheral organization that goes on. Like I remember going into record stores and seeing Aladdin Sane on the rack, and going, when I was 13, and going, oh fuck, that freaks me out.
Yeah.
and I'm not ready for this yet, but I am going to be ready for this at some point. And you put it in the future of your process, and I think that's true with the Velvets, and that with the Velvets, there's always some circuitous path that leads you to them, and then you sort of feel like you found them yourself. It's very personal because of the obscurity they sort of lived within, and that's a big part of it. But to answer your first question, your leading question is I didn't want it to be, there's so many people who could tell us how great the Velvet Underground are, how they influence them as musicians, as artists, as critics, whatever. And I just decided, let's just make it about the time and place. Let's only interview people who were there. So that was very easy. It meant millions of genius people I wouldn't even have to talk to.
Yeah.
and that we would hopefully, you'd find it, the audience could sort of find it themselves when they watched it.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. I saw a music doc recently. I watch them all, but one, it had the opening, and they were interviewing, sitting down was Bill Clinton, talking about how much he liked some band. I was like, wait a second. What does that have to do with anything? Everyone's fans of stuff. Like, I think people who make films, they want to use that as an entree to meet, like, celebrities and famous. Hey, you got to talk about, your favorite group. So everyone agrees. But anyway, filmmaker question. Is there anybody, first off, I love the way you shot. I mean, it's such a great, I don't know. I love the way you shot the current interviews. I assume you shot on 16 millimeter, correct?
No.
You didn't?
They were shot on digital.
Looks like it. Okay.
We grained it up.
Okay.
We did it all. We did all that stuff. But we did Super 8 pieces on everybody, which we used a lot of in the film. And but the real thing was, like, for people who don't know, for people who may not know these terms, the 1:3:3 aspect ratio is the square of the 16 millimeter frame. And most films today, the standard is 1:8:5 aspect ratio, which is more like a rectangle. And so everything about this time and place, to me, was about the 1:3:3 aspect ratio. It was all shot on 16 millimeter. And that's what the Warhol split screen thing does. It puts two squares next to each other in Chelsea Girls. And there's a dual projector.
Oh, yeah. I've projected that. You get the instructions on the Chelsea Girls. Okay, put the sound off on reel 4 and have reel 5 here. Turn the sound down.
You sent that to me.
Yeah?
You sent that to me.
I sent you the film.
You did. Shh.
I had a huge underground bootleg. Every film the Film Society showed from that era, I had a pretty high quality film chain, and I made, because those films fucking weren't available anywhere else.
No.
And I never sold one. I never made a penny. I just gave them to people like you, who I knew would appreciate.
I still have the VHS tapes you sent me in the 90s when you showed them at Austin Film Society, and you had
late 80s, early
90s, Beauty Number 2. And I would never throw it away. It's like a sacred object that you made for me.
Yeah.
While you projected the print, you made direct video transfers of it.
I remember Warhol had passed away, obviously, and then his films were kind of hard to find. And then they made a certain number of them available. We showed them, had a big fest, and I was like, these things ain't coming out on commercially for any time soon. So they've been special possessions, let's say.
So you've been a key part of this archive and keeping it alive, which was definitely a part of this film process. Was me. I don't know if do you know Greg Pierce from the Warhol Museum, the archivist?
No,
Rick?
I don't know him, but I have spent so many hours in that room at the Warhol Museum. If you are in Pittsburgh, go straight to the Warhol. It's my favorite museum in the world. I just go there and sit in that room and put on the headphones, and they have all these films, all those videos. Like when Lou and Andy are just sitting there, there's just hours. Warhol had that camera going. So if you're in the mood, you can put on your headphones, sit there and watch unbelievable stuff. Just Who's Wandering In, Candy Darling singing. I mean, these things are just amazing. But that's just an amazing resource. But you must have sweet-talked them in your own charming way. They seem to have given you access. You got the estate was with you.
We had to negotiate. Look, I worked with I don't know when you've done your docs who you work with, but of course we had to find producing partners for this film. So we partnered with Motto Pictures, Julie Goldman, Chris Clemens, Carolyn Hepburn, and they're New York based, Brooklyn based. And they're just, amazing folks, incredibly, so hardworking, so engaged in every aspect of the research process, which of course, you get into so much in your films. I get into my film. And they were just there to support, all that. And we had to negotiate terms for how we were going to pay for the amount of Warhol footage that we would need to make this film. There was no way to make this film without a primary relationship with those guys. And then that set the standard for the sort of terms for other archives that we would go to.
Yeah, it would not. I don't know what you would have done if you hadn't gotten Warhol. He's so.
It wouldn't have happened. The film wouldn't happen.
You couldn't have done it.
That would have been it.
Yeah, they're so well. I'm going to ask
you. So they had us over a barrel for that reason.
They sure did.
They knew we needed them, but we also felt, come on, look, we were going to do this movie that was going to bring attention. This is not people who don't know this. There's the Warhol Foundation, which deals with the art and deals with a lot of money. And then there's the Warhol Museum, which deals with the films, and they do not have a lot of money. So it's a very different world. And
it's where the Warhol Foundation is very generous, very rich. They're an amazing foundation, and hats off to him for, even though he died unexpectedly and young, he had it in his will to create that thing. So as a nonprofit guy, I totally will forever, love him for that. But yeah, the museum, they're did you see, I remember one of the first times I went in there, they had a whole room that was the Exploding Plastic Inevitable. They had you were walking into, they change it. It's not one of these museums you go to and it's the same thing.
Exhibition.
Yeah, for however many months. But yeah, you walk in and you're at a show.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Incredible. That's amazing.
And those screen tests, my God, let me just digress here. The whole price of admission, that Amy Taubin young screen test, my heart just swelled. That was unbelievable. Do you guys tell everybody who Amy Taubin is?
Amy Taubin is a film critic and somebody who is so esteemed by other journalists in film. Like people who I've been talking to about this movie who I would see at Cannes, and they say, "Oh my God, it meant so much to me to have Amy Taubin." I became a journalist. I became a film critic because of Amy Taubin. But what a lot of people don't know is Amy Taubin was a actor in the 60s. She actually starred on Broadway in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. She played the student the one who bears her bosom, who's like is naked. She sort of competes with Jean Brodie. I know the film version. I never seen the play with Maggie Smith, but she's the kind of conniving student, and that was Amy Talbot. Wow. And then she entered into the sort of avant-garde film world, but she would visit the factory. So she's in, you see her in like eating bananas with a bunch of factory girls in one of the clips, and then she had a screen test done. So she was there like the other folks that we interviewed.
Yeah. Were there any living people that you knew were there that you just couldn't get, that didn't want any?
Gerard.
Yeah, I was wondering, where's Gerard? He's still alive.
He's alive. We tried numerous times to get him in the film. This is Gerard Malanga, who's very still present in the film. He was such a visible sort of centerpiece of a lot of
whip dance.
He's in
he's
so many.
That guy who can.
He does the whip dance. Yeah. Exactly. Stars in Vinyl. He's actually in Barbara Rubin's Christmas on Earth, in having explicit.
You can tell him the original title to that movie.
What is the original title of Christmas on Earth?
Cocks and Cunts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, because it's all sex. Yeah. Oh, anyway.
That's sort of what. Yeah, I mean,
Barbara Rubin.
We don't have that in our movie.
Yeah. No, you didn't. You got close to it, but
we get close to it. But that's Gerard's cock in the movie.
Okay.
And he's very he did he was, they all were exploring everything and performing in every conceivable way. Anyway, Gerard didn't want to do it, and it was sad. And I even said if he didn't feel like being on camera, he was such an Adonis when he was young, maybe he feels
he's forever the beautiful young man.
Totally. I said, send us a poem on tape. He's a poet. And anyway, he didn't want to do it. And then Doug Ewell, who wasn't part of the factory world, but who was so important to the Velvet Underground after John left the band. Mm-hmm. And we went back to Doug and tried to, and he's an activist and environmentalist, and it was the end of the Trump years, and I think he just was engaged with other stuff that felt really pressing and urgent. And there's just times in your life you're ready to talk about the past, and there's times I get it, but I really wanted his voice, and we have his audio in the film, but not a new interview with them.
I just think you bring the past alive so clearly. I mean, the old footage looks so new, the new footage looks old. It's just such a beautiful. It evokes that time. I mean, we were kids, not like we were anywhere near there, right? I mean, it was.
No.
It was.
I know.
It's a coming from a different era, of course, but just close enough to kind of smell it. You saw a little bit as a kid, and I like the way you showed.
Feel that? Didn't you feel that as a kid?
Something
like
far away, but
about the '60s was we were just kids in the little kids in the '60s.
And you know what your film shows is the mainstream, like What's My Secret and John Cage on the mainstream wasn't so far. They were just. Could you imagine today our most avant-garde composers getting anywhere near a talk show?
Exactly.
Or if you're not making money and you're not part of the machine, you don't belong in the conversation in the media. It's unbelievable. But back then,
so true.
They were so interested. Those people, they're kind of laughing, but they're kind of interested.
No,
exactly. It's kind of beautiful that Jackie Kennedy and Walter Cronkite are coming to watch the Velvet Underground.
Go to the Dom and dance at the events.
That there was this scene. It was closer, and now it couldn't be more far away. It's just it was a special time. But as a kid, you're looking, going, "Wow, there's something going on there." And your film, I just so admire that it's not just film, it's not just music. It's everything. You really capture the energy, and it's the different forms. You think Warhol, you think pop,
right?
But it's also an abstract expressionist. It's very much a minimal. Your film explores minimalism so beautifully. You see how these things exist on top of one another. Lamont Young, talk about minimal avant-garde, but he's such a badass, and he's such What was he like?
And Rick, he was in the movie. I mean, I just can't even believe first he agreed to do it, and Marion Zazila, and that he's still walking the earth is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
But I felt that you hear Lamont describing what they were doing, and John Cale talking about the drones. But this was an example of it. It wasn't until we are playing Lamont's music and looking at the early Warhol films.
Yeah.
Kiss, Sleep, Empire, where you put it together yourself, and each one is describing the other, and you see the way ideas are spreading and from artist to artist and medium to medium. And there were parts of this process where I felt like it wasn't until it was like, oh yeah, of course we're going to play the music with the Warhol, but it's not until you actually experience that I think I felt, and I hope the audience feels that they're kind of discovering it for themselves.
Yeah, and these art forms where everyone's really actively asking, what is a film? What is a film can be? What is music? What is a painting?
Exactly.
They're really pushing the boundaries to their fullest extent of what their mediums are, and the way that
Totally.
works interdisciplinary between all of them so beautifully. I don't know. I found it so exhilarating.
You were touching on, and it's what felt even more furthered by being in COVID, but it's part of the way we live today in our digital realms that separate people from people. These unique times of real furtive, creative activity that is incredibly productive and sort of has all of these different aspects are also about people in a very close proximity. Amy Taubman would say it was really just 200 people in New York City who were doing this, but everybody sort of knew everybody else. And there was artists and filmmakers and musicians and poets, and they would be at the same screenings and they would be at the same parties. And so you really felt like it was about the physical proximity of people being with each other, passing on ideas. And also that's where the mediums of art and the boundaries that separate different mediums or categories of art start to break down out of that physical proximity. And that's something we don't, I miss that. And I feel like in the way we separate from each other, and then COVID only furthered that. And all of a sudden we were all isolated from each other and afraid of each other. Mm-hmm. And this was a great reminder of what happens when you smash people together.
Yeah. And those particular people at that time, it's so funny when they go out to LA and they're staying at the hotel and they look like people who stepped out of Scorpio Rising or something. You know what I mean? They're sitting there and you realize, oh, they're their own scene. They're very different. It's very gay. It's very...
Exactly.
It's very different. It couldn't be as simple as East Coast gay, West Coast straight, but there was something...
I mean, Mary Warrenoff would say she's spoken so eloquently about the clash of subcultures and all that, and does so in the film too. But I'd read things she'd written and read her memoirs are
She's
incredible.
Amazing. We love her.
She's amazing. Yeah. But and she would say she was cataloging the differences between the hippie culture and the East Coast culture, and she would say, ending by saying basically they were homophobic and we were homosexual. And she didn't mean that she was literally a lesbian. It was this outlook, this attitude, this sort of affirmation of being of marginality.
Yeah.
That gave a real energy to the kind of art making. And yes, it was transgressive. And yes, it mixed up with drug use and sexual exploration, all those things. But it wasn't literally about what you did in bed. It was more of an attitude that some people would call popism, some people would call camp, and some people would just call the Velvet Underground.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't like straight is like mainstream in a way, versus underground, explorations, pushing it. Yeah.
Exactly. But what's so interesting to me is what that revealed is a kind of bourgeois quality of counterculture, of hippie culture that really was sexist, and that really did need a feminist movement to come out of it by the end of the 60s, and really did need a gay liberation movement to come out of it in the 70s. Like it resembled dominant culture more than they thought. And I think this was something the Velvets and the factory scene, but they weren't intellectual about it. That's also what's so interesting. It was playful, ironic, and so it wasn't like academic or political.
Right.
It was aesthetic.
Yeah, academia hadn't really taken over thinking about this too much yet. It was there, but that was coming. That's what the 70s were all about. But well, what's your opinion? You more than anybody, I'd want to hear what happened between Lou and Andy. The fact that he could fire him like that, was he just getting rid of his Svengali, ready to move on? It must have been pretty heady. Here, this one of the world's famous artists, a decade and a half older than you. You're part of his visual palette, maybe.
Yeah,
and his art. Did Lou get tired of it? You forget how much of an arranged marriage Nico's inclusion was. A brilliant one,
Right.
None of us regret that. My God, that's a masterstroke for a guy who's not really a music guy. He was an aesthetic guy, so the Velvets had that. But do you think Lou just moved on?
I feel like things were moving and evolving at such a rapid pace, and this is true for the 60s in general, but definitely true, I think, for these artists. And so it's sort of like what Lou said. We would never have gotten a record deal if Andy hadn't done the album and if Nico wasn't so beautiful. He understood the opportunities that they made use of. And for a moment, they were the center of the underground scene of New York City. But I think there was such a protean aspect to him creatively, but I think it was also true for John Cale. They were all, and Nico. Yeah. Nico was not going to be the front singer of a band of guys and one insanely genius drummer. She was going to have a solo career on her own terms, and all these things were generating, kind of bursting out of this weirdly artificial moment of accidents and destiny and circumstances and time and place, all of that stuff. So, but also there was always that hostile thing with Lou where he had to kind of burn his bridges in order to get somewhere else. And that's such an interesting part of who he was as a creative person. Yeah,
it's sad to see him break with John Cale, of course, but then you realize he probably had to do that to make.
Yeah,
he's such a fascinating guy. I mean,
I know.
There he was writing kind of brill building, at Pickwick.
Right.
But he had that in him, but he also was this crazy avant-garde guy too. He was both. He had an eye on everything. They say but even when he did get that, and Walk on the Wild Side isn't exactly a sellout. Transformer is. Right. These are not. He just took it to where he could take it, but I don't know. He never.
But what's so funny to me is that what I was surprised by was the thing that Alan, the guy who grew up with him, says. Hyman, he says, Lou in high school was like, I want to be a rock star and I want to make a lot of money rich. And I want to be rich. And you're like, wow, those competing and often contrary instincts were at play in him. They were also in David Bowie.
Sure.
And they both came together for Transformer, and it was the most successful outcome of Lou's solo career. And and of course it wouldn't have happened without Mick Ronson and his guitar and his production, but that's just another chapter that was to come. But anyway, that contrary thing of wanting to succeed but also wanting to really challenge and sort of destroy the territory or the orthodoxy or whatever.
As you segued into Transformer and Bowie, I have to say, this is a digression, but Todd, I just love the scope of what you've done in your films about music, whether they're fictional. Like I would put it the order, you know, you have your Dylan, now you have the Velvet segueing into Velvet Goldmine, right?
Right.
And then you have parallel to that, if you go to the West Coast, you've got Karen Carpenter over there. And you're also showing kind of the pop veneer also has this painful underside, just like in everything else, that you can't escape it. You know, there's something, I don't know. I just love you've really covered such a big swath just in, well, that's 4 movies, but I find it really fascinating. Anyway, just not really a question there, just an observation, something floating through my mind about your body of work that I appreciate so much. You know, here in Austin, Austin, we're going to play this film in this theater from now until a long time, I hope, because Austin's a very velvet town, aren't we? Everyone's going to go tell everybody to come to this. This is an Apple movie, but this is a fucking theatrical movie. Don't you agree? See it in the movie theater. So tell everybody. But, I remember, like I said, Austin's is a velvet town. I remember late 80s, early 90s, going to like a Sweet Jane night at a club where every band got up and played Sweet Jane, all night long. That's that kind of thing. Amazing. And there was always this rumor.
Incredible.
Well, Sterling Morrison, he teaches at UT.
Oh.
And I was like, no. Everybody was like, no. Yeah, he teaches in the philosophy department. I was like, really? I don't know one philosophy student.
But Rick, you never met him, did you?
Not only did I never meet him, I don't know one person who ever had.
Who was in his class?
Is there anyone here who was a student of his, who was a next door neighbor of his? Anything. I thought it was a myth. I mean, I knew it was real, but he didn't. I mean, how cool if he would have shown up at Sweet Jane night and got up and. But he didn't do that. What do you know? Was he running? Was he just a different chapter? Did he not? But there he was at UT teaching. Did his wife say anything?
Martha, we didn't really talk about that so much.
Well, just like the way it was a different phase of life. I mean, that's pretty gutsy to go from being a rock star to going back and get your doctorate in medieval studies. That's my theory of how we were wrong. I always heard philosophy department. I knew people in the philosophy department, and he wasn't there.
No.
But he was in the medieval studies.
Seriously.
What's
I know.
That? Yeah.
But is someone saying they knew him? No.
No. Okay. My point is proven. I really hoped someone would, but no. It might be a myth still. I don't know. Maybe that. But there's that picture in your movie of him standing right there.
I know. Of him standing right there in his little shorts.
It's a nice little footnote for all of us, I guess.
I mean, the way they all sort of splintered away, and Mo goes back to working in IBM, and Lou goes back home for a year and a half.
What the hell is that?
I mean, can you imagine after the Velvet Underground to be living at home? I mean, this is something Meryl would talk about. It was so strange to have him home and not knowing what happened and not knowing to sort of how to fold that back into a domestic life. I think he had ambitions to have a solo career, but they didn't look very good. His first record kind of petered out. It was not. But again, it was pretty quick. That was 71 when his first solo record, Lou Reed, came out, and then 72 when Transformer came out. So things were that's still moving pretty fast.
It's unbelievable how young he still was. He wasn't even 30 after he had that whole lifetime. He's still in his 20s. Unbelievable how young what they did. But okay, so did you ever, I think during the Velvet phase, did you ever cross paths with Lou? Did you ever get to know him?
No.
I'm curious.
I never got to know him. I mean, I'd have Lou Reed sightings in New York City, openings of the Whitney Biennial with Laurie, but I was never ballsy enough to go up and talk to him. When we did Velvet Goldmine, Satellite of Love is a song that we wanted for the film. And it was a very fast yes, unlike my experiences with the Bowie estate, Bowie music publishing. And I sort of was like, that's interesting. Maybe he, saw something I made or somehow approved. I don't know. And Laurie approved. It started with Laurie's sort of discussions with UMG, Universal Music Group, where the masters reside, and they had talked to her about whether this would be a time to do a documentary, and if so, who might be a filmmaker that she'd be comfortable approaching. So maybe, but I don't know.
So you got her blessing.
I got her blessing from the start, and
hell yeah.
Again, it was the only way we would have proceeded, and we needed Meryl and his sister and Laurie share the publishing, and I think the life rights. But all these things had to be checked off the list for us to make it, obviously.
Right. In the New York Times Magazine, I think it was just this last Sunday, big article on Laurie Anderson, interview, talks a lot about it. Was wonderful. It's good timing here, so check it out.
Yeah, it's
Laurie
really
Anderson,
interesting.
one of the more fascinating art couples in history.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And finally, a relationship, with all Lou's conflicts and the ways he'd push people away, you really feel like he found a creative equal, and such a place of a really loving, incredibly, nourishing relationship with Laurie Anderson. And that's how his life ended, with that relationship. And so you got to feel
that's pretty
really good about that, man. He struggled a lot, and that's what he ended up with. So that's like, it's amazing. Her film, Story of the Dog. What is it called? Story of the Dog. Do you know that documentary?
Oh, yes, that's a wonderful documentary. It's on.
It's so beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's a tribute from one artist.
It really
another,
is. And he haunts
so
it.
Close. Yeah, he's there. He's
the
ghost
he haunts
of Lou.
it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful. And it's not just him; it's art. It's it's a good double feature, or not. If not a double feature, it's a good thing to watch near your film here tonight. And thanks so much for, I'm just digressing here to things that are popping on my mind about Jonas Mekas. I love that you dedicate the film to him. I love his presence in the movie. You want to tell everybody who Jonas Mekas was.
Well, Jonas was, Jonas, and that this was the last filmed interview of his life. And we knew he was, 96, I think, when we filmed it, and he died at age 97. Jonas was really the sort of godfather of the American avant-garde, and he was a filmmaker. We have a lot of Jonas's beautiful filmmaking in the film, but he was the one who created a forum and a place for exhibiting this work. And he was a centerpiece. He was a nucleus, and he couldn't be more different from Andy Warhol in temperament and personality. But everybody adored this man and his unbelievable, serious commitment to film art. And that's really what he felt his role was to further this and make a place for it and make it really explode. Yeah.
Filmmaker and curator. I remember in 91, my first film, they said, well, we got to do a premiere. Where do you want to do it? I said, let's do a benefit for the Anthology Film Archives of Jonas Mekas. So that was the only time I ever met him. He was like, oh, thanks. And he seemed really old then. I was weird. This 91. He lives still a few years ago. Unbelievable, the run that
he was so sharp. I mean, he looks, I think he survived well, man. His hearing was so unbelievable, pristine, sharp as a tack. He was present. He was really.
I love the next
crazy.
time you see this movie, if you you see Jonas Mekas with his camera kind of just dancing in the fields, undoubtedly with his camera rolling, getting some of his images. And I love that shot where you see him with his wind-up Bolex, and he aims over, and then you cut right to 16 footage of Andy. I don't know if that's a direct cut, but it sure works. It's just awesome to see him
at work.
Yeah.
In life, working. And the way work and life and art were so, intensely commingled, and how much that meant to And that's what the factory was. It wasn't just a scene of hanging out and doing drugs and going to parties. I mean, it was a highly productive, serious enterprise. And everyone was really motivated to make stuff and to realize that time was precious, and you want to fill it with art making.
Yeah, they said Warhol, his first question was always, "What are you working on? What are you doing? What are your ideas?"
Yeah,
you know, like people always thought, "Oh, he's going to steal my ideas," but no, he was just really curious. And, you know, everybody, what are you producing today? What are you making? So
exactly,
it really seems like it challenged everyone in that environment. Like if you're going to go into that environment, you better, you know.
I mean, they're still discovering tapes.
Yeah.
They're still discovering stuff he recorded. They're still going through the archives. I mean, the film archive alone took fucking, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years to go through. But Greg Pierce said they are still cataloging audio tapes to this day that they are still catching up with. I mean, it was a constant, they knew that something crazy was going on that had to be captured and recorded, you know, and they did.
And
that's what they were doing.
He was such a pack rat documenter. You know, it was the recordings. A lot, the Harry Ransom Center has these tapes. Or I remember going with friends in the 80s, early 90s. You could go up there and just listen to tapes. But then the videos, I'd never seen all the videos. The museum seems to have so many of those, but they're just showing you the kind of some greatest hits, I'm sure.
Right.
There's so much else. But no, it's fascinating. But I just love your film's a wonderful tribute to Warhol and his energy and those times and everything. I'm doing all the talking. If someone has a question that you want to ask Todd, you have a hand up. I'll repeat it so he can hear it. In the course of all your research and all that, anything that was particularly surprising or shocking that you came across and like,
I mean, there was a lot
category.
I mean, I don't know if it was anything shocking. What was surprising was Jonathan Richman's role, because especially in the decision to exclude musicians, fans, film critics from who weren't there. Well, Jonathan
he's
was
your bridge. There. He's the fan he was there.
Exactly. And he occupies all of those roles. But what blew me away was because he was a teenager and he was like full of his he was so curious and so hungry. And they were so patient with him and they were so kind to him. And they let him hang out with them. And he saw 60 to 70 Velvet Underground shows in Boston. I didn't realize.
When he says that, you just kind of lean up in your chair and go.
Yeah, I didn't realize Boston was such a venue for the band after New York City. That was interesting to learn. So that particular part of the story was really
as that interview was going on, you must have been sitting there smiling, going, "Oh my God, I'm getting just gold here. He's putting me there. His enthusiasm is going to fill so much of a
seriously
thing you're not necessarily."
I was weeping by the end of that interview because it was so heartfelt, and he was so grateful, and he thanked the woman at the bookstore in Cambridge who gave him the student press pass so he could sneak into the theater. But I'll end with this amazing story that he told me, which is the night that the Velvets first played at Boston. This was in '67 still. Nico had stopped singing with the band, and Andy was sort of on his way out, but Nico and Andy both came. So Jonathan Richman meets the whole band. He goes backstage with his fake press pass. He meets Andy Warhol and Nico and is talking to Andy Warhol. And Andy Warhol's asking him all these questions about what he's interested in and who he is, right? And at some point, Jonathan goes, "Mr. Warhol, I just have to tell you, I don't understand your art." And Andy goes, "Yes, you do."
Ooh.
And I'm like, that is so beautiful. Ooh. Right?
Love it. Love it. What a great thought.
We all do.
Yeah, we
that's
do.
What's so amazing about that art.
Okay, Todd. Well, so great seeing you, man.
Rick, thank you so much.
The film's going to be playing here for a while. I promise you.
I'm going to have to come. Seriously.
As soon as you can, we got to get you back to town, man.
All right.
So
seriously.
anyway, really, congratulations again. Have fun, man.
Thank you so much.
Great
Thanks,
seeing
you guys.
And thank you guys for being here. Woo!
Yeah, really.
Okay. Good night.
Bye.